Ever had that weird feeling like you've been recognized somewhere you didn't expect? Or maybe an ad pops up that's just too specific.
It's uncanny sometimes.
Right. Now imagine taking that feeling and dialing it way, way up, like being instantly identified from just a random photo someone takes anywhere online.
And it's funny because that used to sound like pure science fiction, didn't it? But, well, here we are.
Exactly. And that's precisely what we're diving into today. We're talking about Clearview AI. It's this pretty secretive company, but the claim is they can identify almost anyone from just one picture.
It's a huge claim.
It is. So we've got these sources, basically excerpts, detailing how Clearview started and the kind of impact it's having. And for you listening, we know you're busy, so our goal here is to really, you know, boil down the essentials of this pretty complex and honestly kind of concerning tech.
Yeah, fundamentally, we're looking at where this incredibly powerful technology bumps up against our basic ideas about privacy, about being anonymous when we're out and about.
Okay, so let's get into how this all even started. The first real sort of peek behind the curtain came back in November 2019.
Mm-hmm.
A reporter at the New York Times got a tip,
Mm-hmm.
and she said herself it sounded too outrageous to be true.
You hear that a lot with tech stories these days, don't you? The outrageous becomes real pretty fast.
Totally. So this tip, it pointed to this legal memo marked privileged and confidential. And what it laid out was, well, pretty wild.
Okay.
It said Clearview AI had scraped billions with a B of photos from everywhere online, basically. Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, you name it.
Gillians, just vacuumed up.
Yeah. And the goal was to build this app.
Okay.
The memo described how you could take a photo of someone, anyone, upload it, and boom, it supposedly shows you all the other places their face appears online. Could give you their name, maybe tons of other details.
Wow.
And the kicker, they were apparently selling this to police departments, all while trying to keep the whole thing super quiet. What jumps out at you from that initial reveal?
Just the sheer scale of it. Billions of photos. It suggests this massive operation happening completely under the radar, right?
That secrecy is what's so striking, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
The reporter reached out to Clearview's lawyer, this guy Paul Clement, for comment. Nothing. Silence. Calls, emails just ignored. It really felt like they were actively trying to dodge any kind of scrutiny.
Yeah, that kind of radio silence definitely makes you wonder, doesn't it? About their motives, the ethics of it all.
It really does.
Yeah.
But the digging continued, and a few key names started popping up. There was this brief mention on PitchBook, you know, that site tracking venture capital.
Right.
It listed a couple of investors. One was unknown, but the other, instantly recognizable and definitely polarizing. Peter Thiel.
Ah, Thiel, PayPal, Palantir, early Facebook.
Exactly. The tech billionaire.
Hmm.
Also known for, well, some pretty unconventional views, backing Trump, funding the lawsuit that took down Gawker. His name definitely adds a whole other dimension to this. Why do you think his involvement matters so much here?
Well, Thiel's whole background is in data analysis, right? Palantir especially. Plus, he's shown interest in tech that can process huge amounts of information.
Yeah.
And given his history with Gawker and the media, well, it makes you think about tools that could shift power and how information gets out.
Exactly. And then you have the guys who actually built it, Hoyenton that,
Yeah.
his background, some previous apps that didn't exactly make waves,
Okay.
and Charles Johnson. He came with a, let's call it a colorful reputation.
Yeah.
But interestingly, Johnson was really into physiognomy.
Physiognomy, like judging people by their faces, that old Victorian thing.
The very same.
Yeah.
He actually thought modern tech could let us revisit those old, mostly debunked ideas, maybe even prove some of them right. It's quite a mix, isn't it? Tech bro meets Victorian pseudoscience.
It is fascinating, yeah. And kind of unnerving. Seeing these old, often biased ideas get a potential new lease on life through technology. The whole computer can tell you someone's character from their face thing. It echoes those older theories, doesn't it?
It really makes you think about how certain ideas just stick around, even when science moves on. Anyway, the book talks about the first meeting between Johnson and Tonat. Apparently, it lasted 10 hours.
10 hours. Wow.
Yeah, they talked about psychology, genetics, Johnson's whole thing about how tech could unlock deeper truths about people.
Huh.
He apparently felt the Victorians really got something, even decided to mostly read pre-1950 books to find enlightenment.
Huh. Intense.
And Tondat was supposedly just blown away by Johnson's ideas, so that initial spark between them seems pretty key to how Clearview got started. What's significant about that partnership to you?
Well, it's that blend, isn't it? Johnson's, let's say, unconventional, historically rooted ideas mixed with Tonat's tech skills. It created this unique, maybe slightly strange foundation for the tech.
And then Thiel comes into the picture,
Yeah.
brought in by Johnson. And guess what a major topic was when Tondat and Thiel met? Not just the face tech.
Let me guess. Gawker.
You got it. Cocker. Thiel had this long-running, deep-seated grudge against them for how they'd covered him, his personal life,
Yeah.
politics. So, yeah, it paints a picture.
It definitely suggests the reasons for investing might have been complex. Maybe not just about the money, but other strategic, maybe even personal goals, too.
Seems plausible. And speaking of operating quietly, the book mentions this funny, telling detail. Someone tried to find Clearview AI's actual office,
Yeah.
the address they had, just a normal apartment building in Manhattan. The doorman was like, nope, no business here, just apartments.
Huh. The irony, a company all about identifying people, hiding out in a random apartment.
Exactly. What does that say to you?
It just reinforces that whole theme of secrecy, right? Trying to stay hidden, which is pretty weird for a company selling identification tech.
Totally. And it all points to the big worry. Clearview's secretly building and using this incredibly potent technology, maybe letting people spy on others without them ever knowing. It just fed into all those existing fears about facial recognition getting too powerful. So maybe we should step back for a second. Where did these ideas about facial recognition even come from historically?
That's a good question. The sources actually dig into some of that early history. Starts with Francis Galton, Charles Darwin's cousin.
Galton, right.
Well,
Eugenics guy.
yeah, his work led there, unfortunately. But initially, building on Darwin, he was trying to see if things like talent and character, not just physical traits, were inherited. He studied the families of people he considered eminent.
Right, trying to find patterns of inherited genius or whatever.
Exactly. But it was based on his own, subjective definition of eminence. He concluded successful people tended to have successful descendants. He even used himself and Darwin as examples, both descended from Erasmus Darwin.
But ignoring things like, I don't know, money, connections, opportunity.
Precisely. He didn't really factor that stuff in. And interestingly, Darwin himself, after getting Galton's book, Hereditary Genius, wrote back politely but critically. He basically said he hadn't read much of it, but thought zeal and hard work were probably more important than pure intellect. Kind of a subtle dig from his own cousin.
Ah, that's great. Shows the nature versus nurture debate was alive and well even then.
Definitely. And reviews of Galton's work were all over the place. Some called him an original thinker, others mocked his arbitrary theories. His methods, like composite photos or family trees, looked scientific but often just reinforced existing biases.
So even way back then, you see this drive to categorize people based on looks. And now fast forward to Clearview. The tech's totally different, obviously, but that basic impulse, using faces to gain knowledge, maybe power, it kind of echoes, doesn't it? Just automated and on a massive scale.
That's a really sharp point, and that continues with people like Cesare Lombroso.
Ah, the criminal face guy.
Yeah, linking crime to physical features. And later, Ernest Houghton did similar work with his book, Crime and the Man. These ideas got heavily criticized, lacked real evidence, but this notion that you can read someone's character, even criminality, on their face, it just wouldn't die.
It's almost creepy how these things resurface.
Yeah.
And that's where the modern tech connection gets worrying, right? This belief that computers, with all their data, can somehow objectively figure out who we really are.
Exactly. It feels like trading phrenology for algorithms, hoping tech gives us an easy answer to a really complicated, maybe invalid question.
Yeah. The book mentions the Dartmouth workshop in 1956, briefly, that early AI milestone where they dreamed of machines thinking like humans. It's wild to think about those early hopes compared to where AI is now.
Indeed. That initial burst of optimism, maybe underestimating the complexity, really set the stage for the ethical knots we're trying to untangle today.
So moving towards actual facial recognition tech, the book mentions Takeo Kanedi's early work. His program struggled with, like, mustaches and glasses,
Right.
but did okay with clean-shaven faces. And he made this pretty bold claim back then that a computer could ID faces almost as well as a person.
That was bold for the time, given the tech's limits, but it was a big step. The first fully automated system, no human help needed. Kind of a clunky ancestor to today's systems.
Right.
That work got him noticed, brought him to Carnegie Mellon.
And then Matthew Turk comes along. His PhD work was really zeroing in on automated facial recognition, inspired by this kind of unsettling idea of a box sitting on top of the TV watching the family.
Oof. Yeah, that's a vivid image.
It really is. Shows how early on people saw the potential for tech to just watch us. Turk got encouragement from Alex Andy Pentland to pursue it. even though AI pioneer Marvin Minsky thought it was basically impossible then.
Right, Pellin saw face recognition as this key part of human intelligence that computers just couldn't crack yet.
Really highlights how ambitious it was and the drive of researchers like Turk to push those boundaries.
Yeah.
So Turk develops this eigenfaces technique. It's like breaking a face down into its core components, right? Distance between eyes, nose shape, jawline. Eigenfaces was the computer's way of doing that, finding key features to tell faces apart.
A mathematical approach to facial features.
Exactly. He presented it at a conference in Maui in '91, all excited.
Hmm.
But the reception was a bit mixed.
Oh.
Yeah, some big shot researcher apparently dismissed it, said it was just a rehash of an older statistical method called principal components analysis.
Ouch.
Yeah, kind of deflating. But even so, it still showed a new way forward for the field. It's funny how breakthroughs often build on older ideas, even if people don't see it right away.
Absolutely. And that initial pushback is often part of the process, makes people refine their work.
Okay, let's switch gears again. Let's talk about the political and social backdrop when Clearview was really starting to form. The book mentions the deplorable.
Ah, yes. January 2017.
Right after Trump's inauguration, a big gathering for his supporters. Charles Johnson and Hoan Tan were supposedly there. It was like a victory party for this online community that felt ignored, mocked, but then felt like they'd won. How does that fit into the Clearview story?
Well, it underscores just how polarized things were, right?
Good.
And the strong sense of identity within those online groups. That kind of climate can sometimes encourage tech that reinforces group identity or offers perceived advantages in what feels like a social battle.
It's such a stark contrast to the huge protests and, real anguish a lot of other people felt after the election. The "Not My President" signs, the marches. The country felt incredibly divided.
It did. And that kind of tension, that division, can create both a market and a justification for surveillance tech, for a tool that can identify people at protests or involved in political action.
Right. The book even talks about that milkshake gate incident.
Oh, yeah, with Project Veritas going undercover.
Exactly. It just shows how charged everything was, how even small things blew up. That level of suspicion and conflict feels really relevant to a tool like Clearview emerging.
Definitely. In that kind of atmosphere, being able to ID, maybe track people based on where they show up or what they do online, that could seem like a really powerful tool to different groups.
So let's loop back to Ton again, that actually building the tech. Around the same time as the deplorable, he was apparently working on an earlier version aimed at normal people.
Okay.
Initially scraped about 2 million faces from places like Venmo and Tinder.
Venmo? Seriously?
Yeah. And Charles Johnson was apparently super excited about it, bragging he could snap someone's photo and see who they were sending money to on Venmo, which, as the book notes, is a huge privacy issue, especially since Venmo transactions were public by default back then.
Wow. Yeah, that definitely rings alarm bells early on about their approach to public data.
So this early focus on scraping social data, even for maybe less serious apps, it feels like a dry run for the massive scraping later.
It certainly suggests a pattern, yeah. Grab public data first, worry about implications later, or maybe not at all.
And get this, ton of days that apparently had a trick for impressing potential investors in demos.
Oh, yeah.
He'd scrape images of the investors themselves and people they knew from places like Crunchbase or Google Images beforehand. That way, when they tried the demo on themselves, bam, instant hit.
Huh. Rigging the demo. Classic startup move, maybe, but ethically.
Right. All about making that first impression, even if it wasn't totally honest about the app's real power yet.
Creates a sense of magic, I guess.
Meanwhile, Charles Johnson, despite being key early on in making the Thiel connection, was kind of being pushed aside. His online reputation got really toxic.
Yeah, I remember some of those headlines. Allegations of Holocaust denial, links to white supremacists.
Exactly. Major liability for a serious company. But, interestingly, Tom That and Richard Schwartz, another early guy, still kept him in the loop initially on emails about the company, then called Smart Checker. Even told him about Thiel's first investment. Shows how messy startup dynamics can be, right? Connections and money sometimes trumping other concerns.
It does show how personal ties and early funding can keep problematic figures involved longer than maybe they should be.
And instead of hiring a proper CTO, Ton That apparently just hired freelance web scrapers, found them in weird corners of the internet sometimes.
Really?
Paid them in crypto, like Ethereum, and crucially, didn't tell them the real reason they were collecting all these faces.
So keeping the scrapers in the dark, too.
Yeah. The whole thing was super stealthy. And the book hints that even then, legal worries were starting to surface. This whole clandestine buildup. It raises questions, doesn't it?
It absolutely suggests they knew, on some level, that what they were doing might not fly if it became public or faced legal challenges.
So, okay, you've built this thing in secret. How do you even start selling it? Richard Schwartz started making moves. He even discreetly pitched Loretta Lynch, the former attorney general.
Pitch the AG.
How? Very indirectly. He apparently hinted it could uncover embarrassing stuff online, but didn't explicitly mention facial recognition. Kind of dancing around the core tech.
Interesting. Suggests they knew the face matching part was the controversial bit, maybe tried to frame it differently.
Then they met with David Scalzo, an insurance broker. Tonat and Schwartz pitched Clearview's Power Instant ID from hundreds of millions of faces. But here's the twist. They initially pitched it mainly for private companies.
Not law enforcement.
They downplayed the law enforcement angle at first, even quoted some anonymous bank security exec calling it a mental detector, not a crime-fighting tool. Seems like a calculated strategy.
Trying to find friendly ground first, maybe? Test the waters in the private sector before hitting the more sensitive police market. Avoids immediate controversy.
But Scalzo was also drawn in by Charles Johnson's theories. His wicked smart ideas about tech changing society. Johnson apparently sold Clearview as vital for the U.S. to win the face race, identify spies, bad actors, even dropped hints about CIA connections.
Ah, the national security justification. That's always a powerful selling point for surveillance tech. Appeals to patriotism, fear.
Definitely. It's fascinating, though, to look back even further. The book points to an FTC workshop way back in December 2011. They were already debating facial recognition privacy then.
Wow, 2011. So the alarm bells were ringing pretty early, well before Clearview was even a thing.
Yeah, the potential problems weren't exactly unforeseen. There was this awkward demo at that workshop. Intel was showing off facial detection software for smart billboards.
Okay.
It completely misgendered the presenter, showed ads for men's stuff on screen when a woman was presenting.
Oh dear, that's not a great look.
Right. Kind of funny, but it really showed how inaccurate the tech could be back then. Highlights the potential for screw-ups.
It does. A good reminder that even simple applications can go wrong, sometimes comically, sometimes maybe more seriously.
And Alessandro Acquisti presented his research from 2010. He'd managed to match student faces to their Facebook profiles using pretty early tech.
I remember hearing about that. That was groundbreaking.
Yeah, and his point was,
Yeah.
look, there are tons of photos online now. People use their real names. This kind of ID is just going to get easier and easier. And he stressed that privacy isn't just about secrecy. It's about control over your information.
That point about control feels so central to the whole Clearview debate, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Acquisti basically predicted what Clearview would do, just
Mm.
on a massive scale. And his focus on user control is exactly what feels violated here.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so let's talk about the big pivot. Clearview going hard after law enforcement clients. How did that happen?
Well, the book mentions Greg Besson, a former NYPD lieutenant. He saw a demo Clearview gave to Rudin Management, a big real estate company thinking about using it for building security.
Ah, so it found its way to the cops via the private sector.
Seems so. Besson was impressed, introduced them to the NYPD. They did a demo for the Financial Crimes Unit using real surveillance photos.
And it worked, unlike some earlier police trials of facial recognition.
Apparently,
Yeah.
yes, it yielded results. And Tan was reportedly ecstatic, finally felt like his app was having a real impact, even if it was with cops instead of the normal people he first imagined. That seems like a huge turning point.
Definitely. A shift from theory to actual use in a really high-stakes field.
Yeah.
Changes the game for policing and surveillance.
And soon after the NYPD success, Homeland Security got on board too. Did a trial, liked it, spent nearly $2 million.
Wow.
And from there, it just seemed to spread like wildfire in law enforcement circles. Became a hot topic at this international conference for child crimes investigators in The Hague.
Child crimes, okay, that's...
Yeah, agencies worldwide started asking for free trials. They saw the potential to ID both perpetrators and victims in child exploitation cases, which, highlights a potentially very powerful positive use case, even amidst all the privacy worries.
Right. That complicates the picture, doesn't it? The potential for good alongside the potential for misuse.
It absolutely does. And that rapid adoption by police really shows how much they valued the power this tech offered, especially for tough cases.
We should probably touch on Facebook's own history here, too. Remember when they rolled out face tagging widely?
Oh, yeah. The backlash was huge. People found it super creepy, terrifying.
Right. Facebook tried to spin it as just helping tag friends you already know, but privacy folks like Alvaro Bedoya were like, whoa, hold on. They felt Facebook was way too casual about such powerful tech, especially compared to Europe, where regulators pushed back hard and Facebook eventually had to turn it off there.
Yeah, the Facebook case really shows how sensitive people are, even when they've technically agreed to share photos. Applying facial recognition is a different level of intrusion for many.
And internally, Facebook developed DeepFace, this
Hmm.
super accurate algorithm.
Mhm.
They kind of downplayed it at first,
Hmm.
but then quietly rolled out similar deep learning tech anyway, making their own tagging way better. And all the while, Zuckerberg's talking up his big vision,
Yeah.
the metaverse, the embodied internet, smart glasses.
Right, suggesting a future where facial recognition is even more baked into everything.
Yeah, that long-term vision suggests this tech isn't going away.
Huh?
It's likely to get more pervasive, which makes the privacy debate even more urgent.
Absolutely. Zuckerberg's plans signal that facial recognition in some form is probably central to the next phase of the internet, making regulation critical.
And people were trying to regulate it. Alvaro Bedoya, back in 2012 after some congressional hearings, started drafting federal laws, initially focused on location privacy.
So efforts were being made.
Yeah, but then you get the really awful case of Robert Williams in Detroit,
Oh, that story was chilling.
right? Wrongfully arrested based on a bad facial recognition match. They used his driver's license photo against the state's mugshot database. It just shows the real harm that can happen.
It's such a stark example. It wasn't just the algorithm messing up, right? It was the whole chain of events afterwards.
Exactly. It was human decisions based on this flawed tech lead. The police report even said, in caps, not a positive identification, not probable cause to arrest.
And they arrested him anyway.
Seems like it. That disclaimer was just ignored, apparently. Really shows the danger of trusting the tech too much, not applying critical thinking.
It really does. Highlights the need for strict protocols, human oversight, and recognizing the potential for bias, both in the tech and in how humans interpret its results.
Then, of course, the pandemic hit. Suddenly, public health trumped a lot of other concerns, including privacy, for a while.
Things shifted dramatically, yeah.
But facial recognition adoption didn't stop everywhere. Madison Square Garden, for example, using a different company's tech, started using it, and controversially used it to ban lawyers from firms that were suing them.
Seriously, banning lawyers based on facial recognition.
Yep. Shows how the tech can be weaponized in ways you might not even expect, impacting people's jobs, access.
That's another layer entirely, beyond crime and security into corporate disputes and access control.
Wow. But the pushback against Clearview specifically was definitely growing. The book says it started spooking potential investors. And early backers like David Scalzo got frustrated. He apparently thought sticking only to law enforcement was bad business long term.
Interesting. So the controversy started hitting their bottom line, or at least future prospects. That suggests the public and regulatory pressure was having some effect.
Yeah, a real tension between the potential market and the growing ethical and legal heat.
Mm.
Then you had Matthias Marx in Europe actively testing them. He asked Clearview for his data under European law.
How did that go?
Apparently, Clearview had trouble even verifying it was him at first.
Mm.
And then, worryingly, they sent him photos of people who just looked like him.
Yikes. Not exactly reassuring.
Not at all. And it led to Hamburg's Data Protection Authority ruling. Clearview violated the law and had to delete Marx's biometric data. Shows the teeth that European regulations like GDPR can have.
Yeah, it really highlights the different legal environments. What flies in one place gets shut down in another. Big challenge for global tech companies.
And separately, in Switzerland, some folks used freely available facial recognition software, not even Clearview, to ID politicians from public event
It's
photos.
just off-the-shelf software.
Yeah. They even found a potentially embarrassing old photo of one young politician. The Swiss data commissioner basically issued a warning like, see how easy this is.
It really drives home how accessible this power is becoming. Not just for states or big companies. Anyone with the software and public photos can potentially do it. Scary implications for privacy and reputation.
For sure. And the ACLU, which has fought surveillance tech for ages, jumped right in with lawsuits trying to stop Clearview.
Makes sense. That's right in their wheelhouse.
But here's a twist. The lawyer who stepped up to defend Clearview against the ACLU, Floyd Abrams.
Floyd Abrams, the big First Amendment guy, defending Clearview. That is surprising.
Right. Known for defending journalists, free speech, now defending a massive facial recognition database. It set up a really interesting legal clash.
Definitely brings a major First Amendment angle into it, arguing Clearview has a right to analyze public photos as speech.
That was exactly his argument in court. Analyzing public photos, creating biometric identifiers from them, that's protected speech, he claimed. But the ACLU's lawyer, Vera Eidelman, pushed back hard.
How so?
He argued this goes way beyond free speech. Biometric data is like fingerprints or DNA-sensitive stuff. The First Amendment doesn't just give you the right to collect and use all information out there however you want. It really frames that core conflict, free speech versus privacy in the digital age.
Yeah, the outcome of cases like that could set huge precedents for how we regulate this tech going forward.
Meanwhile, research in the UK by Pete Fussy looked at live facial recognition.
Like scanning crowds in real time.
Exactly. And his conclusion, it actually makes us less safe.
Yeah.
Because watch lists get bloated, there are false positives.
Yeah.
It creates more problems than it solves, potentially.
Interesting counterintuitive finding.
But you see other uses. A fancy London casino reportedly uses it for white glove service, identifying VIPs when they walk in.
Huh. So, identifying high rollers, not just criminals, shows the range of applications.
It really does. But the book also covers the darker side again, with apps like FindFace in Russia.
Right, I remember hearing about that one.
Used to catch criminals, yes, but also notoriously used to out sex workers, identify anti-corruption protesters, basically confirming the worst fears privacy advocates had about misuse.
Exactly what people warned about. Using it for social control, public shaming.
And Moscow has this huge, citywide facial recognition system, used by police, including to identify people at anti-government protests. Public reaction there seems mixed. A lot of people prioritize the security aspect.
Which shows how different cultures and political systems weigh that privacy versus security balance differently. It influences how readily the tech is accepted and deployed.
China, of course, is the big example. They built their massive camera network alongside developing accurate facial recognition.
So the infrastructure and the ID tech grew together.
Yeah, enabling real-time tracking for all sorts of things, even minor stuff like jaywalking, that apparently hoped Clearview helping ID Capitol rioters on January 6th would win over critics. But his own past comments, seeming to lean authoritarian, didn't exactly reassure everyone. That history still raises flags for people.
Understandably, the potential for misuse is always there, regardless of the stated good intentions, especially with powerful surveillance tools.
Live facial recognition even got used at the Ultra Music Festival down in Miami, monitored from a real-time crime center.
Wow, at a music festival.
Yeah. And while cameras in general can be useful, the book gives an example of a camera resolving a traffic accident dispute. Relying so heavily on facial recognition specifically makes you wonder if important human context gets lost in investigations. It's a trade-off.
It is efficiency versus nuance, tech versus human judgment. A constant tension, especially in law enforcement.
So eventually, facing all this pressure, including from Congress, worried about the impact on marginalized groups, Clearview made a big announcement in February 2022.
What was that?
They said they'd stop selling access to their database to private companies.
Ah, pulling back from the commercial market seems like a direct response to the heat.
Definitely feels like it. A recognition that the widespread commercial use was just too controversial, maybe a strategic move to focus on the more defensible to them law enforcement market.
A major shift in their business model, forced by scrutiny.
And finally, bringing it back to the big tech players. Facebook, now Meta, is still pushing ahead with smart glasses, augmented reality.
The metaverse vision.
Right. And apparently internally, they've had debates about the privacy side of it. Ideas like making faces unsearchable in AR, or maybe even putting virtual name tags on people.
Virtual name tags, wow.
Yeah. It shows the conversation inside these companies is ongoing, complex. They're wrestling with these exact issues. It feels like we're really just at the beginning of figuring out what ubiquitous facial recognition means for us.
It really does. As the tech gets woven deeper into our lives, that dialogue about balancing innovation and privacy just becomes more and more crucial.
So wrapping up this deep dive, it's pretty clear, isn't it? Clearview AI took publicly available photos, built this massive, powerful database, and basically ignited a huge firestorm, ethical, legal, societal. This tech, developed largely in secret, is now out in the open. We see its potential benefits, especially for law enforcement maybe, but also the really serious risks to privacy, to civil liberties.
It's been quite a journey, hasn't it? From these kind of obscure beginnings to this global controversy. It forces us to ask really fundamental questions about surveillance, identity in the digital age, and just what privacy even means anymore.
Absolutely. And hopefully, for everyone listening, you've now got a much richer sense of the history here, the implications, way beyond just the headlines.
Yeah, it's definitely not a simple picture.
Not at all. So here's maybe a final thought to chew on. In this world where facial recognition is just getting better and more common, How do we, as a society, actually strike that balance?
Yeah.
The desire for security, for efficiency, versus the fundamental right to privacy, to just be anonymous sometimes in public.
It's the core question, isn't it?
It is. What boundaries do we need? And maybe just as important, who gets to draw them? It's worth thinking about your own digital footprint, right? All those photos out there, how could they be used or misused? Something to ponder.